So everything is dry, and we have these beautiful little medallions of color, these nice little repeating motifs. And I want you to take a moment and just sort of take it all in. Enjoy the ones that you think are really pretty, and just kind of, acknowledge the ones that maybe don't excite you as much, and maybe you've learned something about what colors really draw you. Maybe you've learned something about what kind of approach to making these motifs really speaks to you. Do you like to do lots of little droplets of color, or do you like these sort of bigger fields of color and seeing them interact in a way where you don't see those edges? Just sort of start to gain a little bit of an understanding about what you think is attractive, and reverse engineering a little bit, if you can, how you got to those more successful gestures and moments within your painting. And don't stress about this. Don't overthink this at all. Just kind of give yourself a moment to enjoy what you've done and to do a little bit of an assessment if that is something that you want to do. I want to enhance these with a little bit of meditative drawing. And what I want to accomplish by doing this is a couple of things, twofold. One is, as I said, meditative drawing that is very repetitive, very simplified, so that I don't have to do a lot of thinking. I don't have to worry a lot about my technical skill level. At the same time that I don't have to worry about my technical skill level, this kind of meditative drawing can be a really nice opportunity for building some technical skills. And one of the skills that it is really helpful to have when using pencil, colored pencil, regular pencil, any pencil, is to be able to make a uniform texture with your pencil line work and shading. So the ability to build layers of color through very light, consistent, and slow applications of color. This is an important skill set if you develop a more elaborate pencil drawing practice. So that is something that I want to use this opportunity to practice. I'm choosing colors that are either cool or neutral. And the reason I'm making those choices is that cool and neutral colors will recede behind bright and warm colors. What is cool and what is warm? Cool are colors that move toward the blue end of the spectrum. So things like blue greens. This is a cool green. And this is a warmer green, because this green contains more yellow, so it moves from the blue end of the rainbow spectrum through those greens, through yellow. So as I go from green to yellow to orange, I am starting to get into the warmer color spectrum. So for those who may not be aware of that, that is what I'm talking about when I talk about cool versus warm in a very rudimentary, very basic, cursory sense. So I'm choosing cool colors, blues, especially blues that might be a little more faded, so things that are not very bright, not very saturated. And those are the colors that I am going to work around these motifs, these medallions. So all these spaces in between, I'm going to work some kind of texture behind that. And I think in one case, I'm going to use pencil to do this. And in another case, this page, I'm going to meditatively draw using just gray fine liners. So this is going to be a more linear, more geometric, doodled approach to filling that space. And I'm going to use these grays rather than a particular color because I feel like these circles will still have the opportunity to kind of jump forward of these grays a little bit. They won't compete that much with them. So I'm going to start with the pencil version. And in this case, there's not a lot to it. I'm really just going to focus on making as consistent and as uniform and as unobtrusive a filled-in area as I can make. I'm going to use the point of the pencil very lightly and just take it right up to the edges of all of these motifs. This is the kind of drawing that sometimes I'm very resistant to because it feels, I'll be honest, boring. And that's all the more reason, I think, to make myself do it and encounter those feelings and sit with that sense of boredom and push past it a little bit. Because I believe that this is a meditative practice in the truest sense. It is a practice that requires deliberation and focus and attention. And it's most successful when I'm really, really able to zero in on what I'm doing and accept that sense of that little bit of tedium. So I'm giving myself some rules. And one of the rules is that I'm really trying to avoid overlapping color. So I'm avoiding going back over cross-hatching that I've already made. I'm really trying to make it so that each cross-hatched stroke is happening over blank paper only and not over paper that I've already covered with my pencil, if that makes sense. So I am using low pressure, short strokes, and I'm keeping my instrument moving across the empty space on my page. And I really like the movement that I'm getting because of that light little bit of texture. I'm not burnishing out all texture. I'm not keeping my strokes so small that there's no apparent texture. There's a little bit of directionality in this, and I really want that. I'm trying to allow that to happen. So you do not have to do yours with the same set of rules, the same sort of, the same constraints on your page as I have on my page. But I encourage you to come up with some little challenge for yourself and to use that as a way to give yourself a constraint, of your own invention. Or you can copy my constraints and my sort of rule set. That's totally fine too. Why am I doing something that is so simple? Because this is, to me, it's nice to have a journal that fits into the demands of the rest of my life. So I can sit here and make a video, that's well and good, but it's really nice to be able to have sort of the art journaling equivalent of the TV knitting project, right? Something where you don't have, like for this part, I feel like the equivalent in knitting would be to have something where you have a pretty important count that you kind of have to pay attention to. But then for this part, it's like scarf knitting, right? You don't have, you have a count, but you don't have a lot of different changing stitch counts and lots of demands on how you construct your garment. You're just doing one thing consistently. Part of the pleasure of this for me is the sound and the sensation. This paper has a little bit of a tooth or a grit to it, so the way that it grabs the wax in my pencil and sort of holds that wax in its texture, and that's how I get these marks. That the way that that feels and the way that that sounds is very satisfying to me. So part of sketchbooking for me is not just about planning my next masterpiece, which is very little of sketchbooking for me, by the way. But part of it is not just planning that next masterpiece, but just having these really satisfying sensory experiences that I could probably get them through other means, but this is my favorite one. So that's all right. You know, there are parts that I feel like I've doubled up too much, gotten a little heavy-handed, but overall I'm pretty happy with it. And I just wanted to have some kind of unifying texture behind these. In this case, let's try using pen and seeing if we can't make a little bit of a geometric motif that functions similarly to this nonetheless. I'm going to start with my lighter of my gray markers, and in this case I'm going to doodle a connecting triangular motif. So when I do something like this, I pretty much just start anywhere and draw a triangle and then continue to connect triangles to that first triangular shape. So it's a doodled motif that just builds on itself. I don't feel that the triangles in my drawing here have to be uniform in size or perfectly scaled or connect in a regular kind of consistent shape. They can be a bit organic. But I need to decide things like how am I going to handle them butting up against the edge of these circles. So I could wedge tiny triangles in there and make sure that there's an edge against each of these circular edges. Or what I think I'm going to do instead is just imply that the circle overlaps my triangular doodle. So, for example, here, that implies that it overlaps. And I think that that is how I'm going to choose to handle those consistently throughout this drawing. So this also represents a little challenge that I've given myself, because I tend to doodle more organic curved shapes, and I tend to shy away from geometrics, but I want to develop some geometrics within my visual vocabulary. It's something I want to work on. So here is a low pressure way for me to start to incorporate some of that drawing and start to normalize some of that drawing for myself. The consequences for doing this in a way that I just don't like or just don't feel is successful, doesn't satisfy me, are very low. It's just a page in my sketchbook and nothing more. So I don't have to worry about whether I'm doing my, whether I'm having a great success at incorporating this new way of drawing. So that's one of the benefits as an artist of keeping an art journal or sketchbook. It's not necessarily a place where I have to plan out the specifics of pieces, but it's a place for me to safely try out new skills that are not necessarily fully developed and not necessarily ready for prime time. That's okay. Can you see why I think this gray is a somewhat better choice than maybe a black pen in this case, if I have the option? If I didn't have access to this gray, I think I would still use a black pen like a Micron or a Bic pen from my drawer, and that would be fine. It's just nice to have the option in this case, I think, to do something that's a little bit lighter in value, so it doesn't jump forward quite as much. It's not quite as strong a line, and it doesn't grab as much of our attention as it would if it was black, I think. There are going to be mistakes. There's going to be little hiccups, and it's not a big deal because you're doing so many iterations of it that one little hiccup like that is not going to jump out that much. If you feel really strongly about it and you have like one little flaw, make it happen again somewhere else, and it really doesn't matter that much. Just repeat the mistake, and then it becomes intentional. Sometimes that helps. I find it really helpful to turn my stuff around from time to time. It just gives me better leverage and a more comfortable relationship to the angle that I'm drawing at. So if you're ever having trouble, flip your work around and see if you can't get a little more fluidity and a little more steadiness by turning your work. So you can see how I might feel that a little bit of a connective kind of drawing, a little bit of a visual lead from one of these to the next really ties these together as a single spread and unifies them and kind of brings this sense of this as an image to more of a finish. I could do a little bit of writing down here or something, and I may choose to do that. But for now, I'm pretty happy with this as a day of nice meditative journaling that I can look at and feel happy about and accomplished because of.